What if your anxiety isn't your enemy, but a signal that something in your life truly matters? Anxiety doesn't mean you're broken. It means your body and mind are working exactly as they were designed to. We spend so much time trying to silence anxiety, but what if the real key is learning to listen to it? When we think about anxiety, our first instinct is usually to view it as a problem, something broken inside of us that needs to be fixed. We often describe it as an enemy, a constant barrier that keeps us from feeling calm, confident, or in control. But here's the truth: anxiety is not the enemy. It is not proof that something is wrong with you. It is proof that something inside you is working exactly as it was designed to. The human brain evolved to scan for danger, to notice risks before they happen, to prepare you for challenges that you might face. Anxiety is the way your body and mind are reminding you that something matters, that you are alive and aware, that your choices and your future have weight. The real problem is not that anxiety exists. It is that we misunderstand what it means. Think about it this way: every feeling we experience has a purpose. Happiness encourages us to seek more of what's good. Sadness signals that we've lost something important. Anger pushes us to defend what we care about. Anxiety, in the same way, is the spark that tells you to pay attention. It's like the dashboard light in a car. When it flashes, it doesn't mean the car is ruined. It means something deserves your awareness. If you ignore it, you may run into bigger issues later. But if you see it for what it is, if you pause and reflect, you can use that information to steer in the right direction. The problem comes when we confuse the signal with the outcome. We begin to believe that because we feel anxious, we must already be failing, that anxiety is a sign of weakness or instability. But that belief is what amplifies the feeling. It adds shame and self-criticism on top of the initial worry, turning what could be a simple warning light into a floodlight that blinds us. That is why the first step to reducing anxiety is not to fight it, but to understand why it matters. Let's imagine an example. Picture a student preparing for an exam. The night before, they feel their chest tighten, their thoughts race, and their stomach churn. The immediate reaction is to think, something is wrong with me. Why can't I calm down? But if you step back, the anxiety is not random. It's a signal that the exam matters to the student, that their performance could affect their future. The anxiety is pointing toward importance. It is proof of care. If the exam didn't matter, there would be no anxious energy. So the anxiety itself is evidence of value. This is why reframing anxiety is powerful. Instead of asking, why am I anxious? Ask, what is my anxiety pointing to? In doing that, you transform the feeling from an enemy into a guide. It tells you that you care about how things turn out, that your standards and goals are meaningful. That shift alone doesn't eliminate the tension in your chest or the racing thoughts in your mind, but it creates a foundation. It creates the why that makes every following step possible. Without understanding why anxiety matters, any strategy for managing it will feel like patchwork, temporary fixes, without deeper change. Now think about how this plays out in everyday life. A parent feels anxious about their child's first day at school. On the surface, the worry feels heavy and consuming. But beneath it, the anxiety is rooted in love. It's rooted in the parent's hope that their child will be safe, happy, and accepted. In that sense, anxiety is a mirror of care. When viewed this way, the parent can acknowledge the feeling, honor what it means, and channel that energy into supportive action, like preparing the child with encouraging words or packing their favorite snack. Another example, someone about to start a new job feels restless the night before. They toss and turn, unable to sleep, because thoughts about performance, coworkers, and expectations keep cycling through their mind. On the surface, this looks like the brain sabotaging them. But why does the anxiety exist? Because the job matters. Because the person values the opportunity. Because they want to succeed. The anxiety is not proof of weakness. It is proof of significance. Here's where most people struggle. They treat anxiety as something to push away, numb, or escape. They reach for distractions, substances, or denial, believing that the feeling itself must disappear before they can live fully. But when we do this, we cut ourselves off from the very signal that could help us move forward. Awareness matters because it is data. It is information about what we value, what we fear, and what we hope for. To reduce it, we must first listen to it. This doesn't mean anxiety should dominate our lives. It doesn't mean we should welcome endless worry or let fear dictate our choices. But it does mean we should recognize its purpose. Anxiety is not meaningless noise. It is communication. If you want to reduce it, you begin by honoring that message, by saying this feeling matters because what it points to matters. That acknowledgement alone is often enough to lessen the weight.
Understanding why anxiety matters also builds compassion for ourselves. And for others, too often we see anxiety as a flaw, something that makes us less capable. But when you understand that anxiety is simply your body's way of protecting what you care about, you can approach yourself with kindness instead of judgment. You stop labeling yourself as broken and start seeing yourself as human. And when you see others experiencing anxiety, you can respond with empathy rather than dismissal, because you know that their struggle is not weakness, it is evidence of care. When you shift your perspective in this way, anxiety no longer defines you. It becomes part of the story, but not the entire story. It becomes a tool for awareness, not a trap. It becomes a tool for awareness, not a trap. It becomes the beginning of growth, not the end of peace. And this is why starting with why is the foundation of any real journey toward reducing anxiety. When it comes to reducing anxiety, awareness is everything. Most of the time, people want quick relief, something to shut off the noise, calm the nerves, or silence the racing thoughts. But without recognition, without understanding where the anxiety is coming from, any relief will only be temporary. Anxiety is as random. It has roots, and until you begin to recognize those roots, the feeling will keep resurfacing, no matter how many times you try to push it down. The first real step after understanding why anxiety matters is to turn inward and notice what is actually happening beneath the surface. Recognition begins with slowing down enough to pay attention. In the rush of everyday life, anxiety often sneaks in unnoticed. It shows up as irritability, procrastination, or even physical symptoms like tightness in the chest, headaches, or stomach discomfort. Many people mistake these signs as unrelated issues, when in reality they are signals pointing toward the same root, an anxious mind at work. To recognize the root, you must first learn to notice these patterns without judgment. It's not about labeling yourself as too sensitive or too weak. It's about observing, like a curious scientist, where the anxiety begins to take shape.
Every person's anxiety has a different story. For some, it starts with past experiences. Moments where they felt unsafe, unprepared, or judged. For others, it comes from future uncertainty, the fear of not knowing what's ahead, the pressure of expectations, the worry of failure. Sometimes it comes from the stories we repeat in our own minds, beliefs we've carried for years that whisper, "I'm not good enough," or "I don't belong." These roots are powerful because even when the present situation is not dangerous, the mind interprets it as if it were. Recognizing those roots means asking yourself, where is this coming from? What story am I telling myself right now that might not be true? Take the example of someone who feels anxious about public speaking. On the surface, it seems obvious. They don't want to mess up in front of others. But when you dig deeper, the root may go back years. Perhaps as a child, they were laughed at for saying something wrong in class. Or maybe they grew up in an environment where mistakes weren't allowed, and every slip was met with criticism. Without recognition, every new opportunity to speak feels like the same danger, even though the environment has changed. Recognition doesn't erase the fear instantly, but it helps separate the present from the past. It helps you say, this reaction is old. It doesn't define what's true right now. Another common root is the fear of uncertainty. Humans are wired to crave predictability, to know what's coming next. When the future feels unclear, the mind often fills in the blanks with worst-case scenarios. If you're waiting for test results, preparing for a big decision, or navigating change, anxiety may show up, not because something bad is guaranteed to happen, but because the unknown leaves room for your imagination to spiral. Recognizing the root here means noticing that the fear is less about what is real and more about what could be. It means saying, I don't know the outcome yet, and my anxiety is trying to prepare me for possibilities.
There's also the root of self-criticism. Many people experience anxiety, not because of external threats, but because of the harsh voice inside their own head. This voice magnifies mistakes, anticipates rejection, and convinces them they are never enough. If you constantly feel like you're being judged, even when no one else is criticizing you, the root is likely an internal narrative built over time. Recognizing this root requires listening carefully to your inner dialogue. What are you telling yourself right now? Would you speak to a friend that way? Awareness of that internal voice is the first step to loosening its grip. Recognition is also about connecting the dots between mind and body. Anxiety is not only a mental experience, it is physical too. Your body stores stress in subtle ways: tight shoulders, clenched jaw, shallow breathing. These are not random discomforts. They are the body's way of signaling that the mind is under pressure. Too often, people treat the body as separate from the mind, but recognition means paying attention to both. When you notice your breath shortening or your heart racing, ask yourself, what thought came before this? What situation triggered it? These physical signs can guide you back to the root more quickly than trying to analyze everything in your head.
Recognizing the root does not mean overthinking or analyzing endlessly. It is not about spiraling deeper into the worry, trying to figure out every possible cause. It is about awareness in the moment, about identifying the pattern that shows up again and again. Over time, you may begin to see themes. Perhaps most of your anxiety is tied to social approval, or maybe it consistently appears when you feel out of control. These themes become the map that helps you navigate. Without that map, you are lost in the storm of anxiety, reacting blindly. With it, you begin to see where the clouds form, and you can prepare before they take over. Consider a professional who constantly feels anxious at work. At first, they assume the stress is simply part of the job. But through recognition, they notice a pattern. Their anxiety spikes most when they receive feedback from a manager. The root, it turns out, is not the workload itself, but the fear of disappointing authority figures. Once they recognize this, they can address the real issue, building confidence, reframing feedback, and separating their worth from external approval. The anxiety may still appear, but now it has a name, a cause, a story they can work with.
Recognition also requires honesty. Sometimes we avoid the root because it feels uncomfortable to admit. It's easier to say I'm just stressed than to admit I'm afraid of being rejected or I'm terrified of failing. But the longer you avoid the truth, the stronger the anxiety grows. Honest recognition is not weakness, it is courage. It is the willingness to face what is real inside you rather than running from it. And in that honesty, the root begins to lose its power. When you learn to recognize the root of your anxiety, you stop treating the surface symptoms as the whole story. You stop blaming yourself for being too nervous or too fragile, and instead you begin to see the deeper patterns that shape your experience. You realize that anxiety doesn't appear out of nowhere. It has roots in memory, in fear, in self-talk, in the body, and in uncertainty. By noticing those roots, you create the possibility of change.
When you begin to understand that anxiety is not the enemy, and you start to recognize the roots that feed it, the next step is to shift the way you see it altogether. Perspective is everything. The way you interpret anxiety determines the way you respond to it. If you see it only as a threat, you will fight it, hide from it, or drown in it. But if you learn to see it as a form of preparation rather than punishment, it transforms from something that paralyzes you into something that empowers you. The shift in perspective does not remove anxiety from your life, but it changes its meaning, and meaning is what shapes your entire experience.
At its core, anxiety is your body's natural response to perceived challenge or danger. When you feel anxious before a presentation, a job interview, or an important decision, your system is not trying to destroy you. It's preparing you. Your heart races to pump more blood to your muscles. Your breathing quickens to get more oxygen into your system. Your mind sharpens to scan for possibilities. In evolutionary terms, this response helped our ancestors survive when facing predators or threats. Today, we rarely face lions or tigers, but our nervous system reacts as if we do. What feels like punishment is in reality your biology gearing up to help you perform.
This is where perspective matters. Imagine two people experiencing the same symptoms before stepping on stage to give a talk. Their palms are sweaty, their chest feels tight, and their thoughts are racing. The first person thinks, "This is awful. I can't handle this. My body is betraying me." The second person thinks, "This is my body giving me energy. This is how I know I'm ready." Both are feeling anxiety, but the meaning they give it completely changes the outcome. The first person spirals into panic, while the second person channels the same energy into focus and confidence. Nothing about the physical symptoms changed, only the perspective.
Shifting perspective also means realizing that anxiety does not always signal danger. Sometimes it signals opportunity. Think about moments when you felt anxious before something meaningful, asking someone out on a date, stepping into a new role, moving to a different city. The anxiety was not there to stop you. It was there to remind you that what you were about to do mattered. If you didn't care about the outcome, there would be no anxiety. When you shift perspective in this way, you stop asking, "Why am I anxious?" and instead ask, "What does this anxiety tell me about what I value?" That question reframes the experience from something negative into something purposeful. Another way to shift perspective is to understand that anxiety is temporary. In the heat of the moment, it feels permanent, as if the intensity will never fade. But anxiety comes in waves. It rises, peaks, and eventually falls. The mind often convinces you that the feeling will last forever, which amplifies the fear. by remembering that anxiety is temporary. You can ride the wave rather than drowning in it. This shift does not make the wave disappear, but it gives you the patience to let it pass. You begin to see anxiety as weather, not climate, as something that comes and goes, not something that defines who you are. Perspective also changes when you stop resisting anxiety and start accepting it. Resistance often fuels the fire. When you tell yourself, I shouldn't feel this way, or I need to get rid of this now, the pressure doubles. You feel anxious about being anxious, but acceptance loosens the grip. It's the difference between fighting a storm and opening an umbrella. When you accept anxiety as part of the moment, you create space for it to exist without letting it control you. This perspective is not resignation, it is strength. It says, I can feel this and still move forward.
There's another perspective that can transform the way you relate to anxiety: gratitude. It may sound strange at first. Why would anyone be grateful for anxiety? But gratitude does not mean you enjoy the discomfort. It means you recognize the role anxiety plays in protecting you. It means you appreciate the fact that your system is wired to care about your safety, your performance, your relationships, and your future. Without anxiety, you would not prepare, you would not adapt, you would not grow. By shifting to gratitude, even in small doses, you soften the hostility you feel toward yourself when anxiety shows up. Instead of saying, why is this happening to me? You begin to say, thank you for the reminder, I see what matters here.
Perspective also expands when you separate yourself from your anxiety. Too often, people identify with it so deeply that it becomes their label, I am anxious. But anxiety is not your identity. It is an experience. Saying, I am anxious, makes it sound permanent, as if it defines your whole being. But saying, I am experiencing anxiety, reminds you that it is just one part of the moment, not the entirety of who you are. That subtle shift in language reflects a deeper shift in perspective. You are not your anxiety. You are the observer of it.
Think about how athletes approach pre-game nerves. Many describe feeling anxious before a big competition, but they interpret those nerves as excitement, as readiness. Their bodies respond the same way as anyone else's: heart racing, stomach fluttering, but their perspective shifts the meaning. They know that the adrenaline is preparing them to perform at their best. What could easily be labeled as crippling anxiety becomes fuel. The only difference is perspective.
Even in everyday life, perspective shapes the way anxiety feels. Standing in traffic, you might feel anxious and irritated, convinced the delay will ruin your day. But if you shift perspective and see it as extra time to listen to music, reflect, or even just breathe, the anxiety softens. The circumstance hasn't changed. The way you see it has. Perspective does not always solve the problem, but it always shapes the experience. Shifting perspective also means being willing to see anxiety not just as a challenge, but as a teacher. Every time it appears, it offers insight into your fears, your desires, and your values. If you avoid it, you lose that lesson. But if you lean in with curiosity, asking, what is this anxiety trying to teach me? You open yourself to growth. It may reveal that you care deeply about how others perceive you, or that you place high expectations on yourself, or that you are stepping into unfamiliar territory. Whatever the lesson, anxiety becomes more than a burden. It becomes feedback.
In the end, perspective is the bridge between fear and freedom. You cannot always control when anxiety arrives, but you can control the story you tell about it. And the story you tell determines whether anxiety weakens you or strengthens you. After you understand why anxiety matters, after you begin to recognize its roots, and after you learn to shift your perspective, the next step is not to look for grand solutions or overnight transformations. Real change begins with small, simple action. Anxiety often convinces you that the problem is too big, too overwhelming, and therefore the solution must also be equally massive. But the truth is that anxiety loosens its grip through the smallest of steps, repeated consistently, rather than through dramatic gestures that you cannot sustain. Small actions are powerful because they are doable in the moment, and every small act begins to break the cycle of anxiety in ways that create momentum. One of the simplest actions you can take is to focus on your breath. Anxiety pulls you into the future, into the endless what-ifs and imagined catastrophes. Breathing brings you back to the present. It slows the racing mind by anchoring you in something immediate and physical. When your breath is shallow and fast, your body receives the message that you are in danger. By consciously slowing your breath, inhaling deeply through your nose and exhaling fully through your mouth, you send a different message. I am safe. I am here. This is one of the smallest possible actions, yet it directly rewires the nervous system. In moments of overwhelm, it does not solve every problem, but it creates space where you can begin to think clearly again.
Another small action is grounding yourself in your senses. Anxiety thrives in the mind where it can multiply scenarios and expand fears. But when you engage your senses, touch, sight, sound, taste, and smell, you remind yourself that reality exists here and now, not in imagined futures. Placing your hand on a solid surface, noticing the colors in the room, listening to the subtle sounds around you, these are not dramatic interventions, yet they interrupt the cycle of anxious thought. They bring the mind back from endless spirals into a grounded moment of presence. Writing is another small action with disproportionate power. When anxiety swirls inside your head, thoughts feel larger than life, heavy and unmanageable. But when you put those thoughts on paper, you shrink them down to size. They become words you can see, examine, and question. Journaling, even for 5 minutes, can shift the way you hold anxiety. It takes what feels like chaos in your mind and organizes it into sentences. Sometimes, simply writing out your fears makes you realize that many of them are exaggerated, incomplete, or even illogical. The act of writing does not erase the anxiety, but it moves it from a formless storm into something tangible you can reflect on. Movement is another action that seems small yet carries profound impact. Anxiety often traps energy inside the body, leaving you restless, tense, and jittery. Moving, whether it's a walk outside, stretching in your living room, or even standing up and shaking out your arms, helps release that stored energy. It signals to your body that you are not frozen in fear, that you are capable of action. The movement does not have to be strenuous. Even a slow walk can lower stress hormones and bring clarity. Small as it seems, moving your body shifts the state of your mind. Small actions also involve creating routines that anchor you. Anxiety thrives in unpredictability. When everything feels uncertain, even minor disruptions can feel overwhelming. Simple daily rituals, like making your bed, drinking a glass of water first thing in the morning, or setting aside a consistent time to unwind, create stability. These routines may appear insignificant, but they send a message to your brain. There is order here. There is structure. There is something I can rely on. That message, repeated day after day, reduces the overall intensity of anxiety. Another small but powerful action is practicing micro moments of mindfulness. People often assume mindfulness requires long meditation sessions or perfect stillness, but mindfulness is simply about paying attention on purpose. Even pausing for 30 seconds to notice the feeling of your feet on the ground, or the sensation of water as you wash your hands, counts as mindfulness. Each time you do this, you train your mind to return to the present instead of racing ahead into anxious predictions. Small moments accumulate, and over time they change the way your mind responds to stress. Connection is also a small action that makes an enormous difference. Anxiety isolates. It convinces you that you are alone, that no one would understand, that you should not burden others. But reaching out to a trusted friend, sharing how you feel, or even sending a short message that says, "I could use some support," breaks that isolation. The action may take less than a minute, but the impact can be profound. Feeling heard and understood eases anxiety because it reminds you that you are not facing it in silence. Another small step involves shifting your environment. Sometimes anxiety is amplified simply by where you are, sitting in a cluttered space, scrolling endlessly on your phone, or staring at the same screen for hours. Standing up, opening a window, stepping outside, or clearing a small corner of your space can shift your mental state more than you realize. The environment influences the mind, and by adjusting even the smallest element of it, you give your brain a new signal of clarity. Small actions also include speaking differently to yourself. The way you frame your inner dialogue has a direct impact on anxiety. Instead of saying, "I can't handle this," you might say, "This is hard, but I am learning to handle it." Such shift in words is small, but it begins to change the way your brain interprets the challenge. Over time, these small shifts in language build resilience. You do not need to recite elaborate affirmations or force false positivity. You simply need to introduce kinder, truer words in the moments when anxiety is loudest. It is easy to underestimate the power of small actions because they do not feel dramatic in the moment. When you are overwhelmed, taking a deep breath or writing down a thought may not feel like enough. But small actions compound. Each one weakens the hold of anxiety, little by little. Each one creates a moment of clarity, of relief, of perspective. And when you string these small actions together consistently, they create momentum that carries you forward. Anxiety feeds on the feeling that you are powerless, that there is nothing you can do. Every small action is proof that you do have power, that you are capable of interrupting the cycle, and that the first step toward reducing anxiety is always smaller than it seems.
The process of reducing anxiety is not about finding a single perfect solution that eliminates it forever. It is about creating consistent movement in the right direction. Momentum is what carries you forward when your energy is low, when your motivation fades, and when the weight of anxiety feels too heavy to push against. The truth is that momentum is not built from giant leaps or overnight changes. It is built from small, repeated steps that compound over time. Building momentum is what turns isolated moments of relief into lasting patterns of resilience.
When anxiety takes over, it often convinces you to do nothing. It whispers that it's too overwhelming, that you're not capable, that any effort would be pointless. In those moments, starting feels like the hardest part. But momentum does not require perfection. It only requires initiation. Taking one step, no matter how small, breaks the static energy of anxiety. That first action might be as simple as standing up from the chair, writing one sentence in a journal, or stepping outside for a breath of fresh air. Once you take that initial step, the next one becomes just slightly easier. This is the essence of momentum. Each step creates the conditions for the next. Momentum also builds through consistency. Anxiety thrives on unpredictability, on the constant shifts in focus and mood that leave you feeling unsteady. But when you create steady habits, practices you return to again and again, you establish a rhythm that anxiety cannot easily disrupt. For example, practicing a daily breathing exercise for 5 minutes may not seem transformative on its own. But over weeks, the repetition trains your nervous system to find calm more quickly. The habit itself becomes an anchor. Each time you return to it, you reinforce the message that you are not powerless. That consistency is what creates lasting momentum. Think about how momentum works in other areas of life. A runner does not build endurance by sprinting once. They build it by running regularly, allowing the body to adapt step by step. A musician does not master an instrument by practicing for 10 hours in one day and then ignoring it for a month. They build skill through daily repetition. In the same way, reducing anxiety is not about dramatic once-in-a-while efforts. It is about building a rhythm of small practices that add up. Momentum is the quiet force that grows beneath the surface, until one day you realize you are stronger than you thought.
Momentum also requires patience. Anxiety often pushes you to look for instant results. You want the feeling gone now, but lasting change happens gradually, almost invisibly at times. Building momentum is about trusting the process, even when progress feels slow. It is about noticing subtle shifts, the way your recovery from anxious moments becomes faster, the way your thoughts feel slightly less overwhelming, the way your body learns to settle more quickly. These small victories may not feel monumental in the moment, but they accumulate. Patience allows you to see momentum not as a single breakthrough, but as a steady climb.
An important part of building momentum is celebrating progress, no matter how small. Anxiety often blinds you to your own growth. You focus so much on what still feels difficult that you forget to notice what has improved. But when you pause to recognize even the tiniest wins, the fact that you handled a situation with a little more calm than last time, or that you remembered to breathe instead of spiraling, you reinforce the belief that change is happening. Celebration is not about pretending everything is perfect. It is about acknowledging movement. Every acknowledgement strengthens momentum because it reminds you that your effort is making a difference.
Another way momentum builds is through compounding actions. One small choice leads to another. Choosing to step outside for a walk might lift your mood enough to inspire you to call a friend. That conversation may remind you that you are not alone, which lowers your stress and allows you to sleep better that night. The next day, with more rest, you feel more capable of facing your tasks. None of these actions on their own solved everything, but together they created a chain of improvement. Momentum is not about isolated steps. It is about the way each step multiplies into the next.
Momentum also involves building trust with yourself.
Anxiety often erodes self-trust by convincing you that you cannot handle challenges, that you will fall apart when things get difficult. But each time you take a small action and follow through, you rebuild that trust. You prove to yourself again and again that you are capable of responding, capable of showing up, capable of moving forward even when it feels hard. Over time, This growing self-trust becomes one of the most powerful forms of momentum. It shifts the way you view future challenges because you carry evidence that you have faced difficulty before and found your way through.
Building momentum does not mean you will never stumble. There will be days when anxiety feels stronger than your practices, when you feel like you are back at the beginning. But momentum allows you to see setbacks differently. Instead of viewing them as proof of failure, you begin to see them as pauses in the journey. Because momentum is not destroyed by a single stop. It is regained by resuming the movement. When you trust the process of momentum, you understand that every time you return to your practices, you pick up where you left off stronger than before.
Momentum is also built in community. While individual actions matter, surrounding yourself with people who encourage growth adds fuel to your progress. When others hold you accountable, remind you of your strength, and celebrate your efforts, momentum accelerates. Anxiety tells you to isolate, but momentum grows when you share the journey. Each shared story, each moment of support, each reminder that you are not alone adds weight to the forward motion. You begin to realize that building momentum is not only about personal strength, but also about collective encouragement.
In many ways, momentum is what turns anxiety from a constant cycle of fear into an opportunity for resilience. It is the quiet force that builds beneath your everyday actions, the invisible progress that compounds over time, the reminder that change is possible not through one giant leap, but through many small steps that never stop adding up. Momentum is the bridge between where you are and where you want to be, and it is built one simple, consistent action at a time. Anxiety is not proof of weakness. It is proof of being human. It shows up because something matters, because your mind and body are designed to care, to protect, and to prepare you for what's ahead. The first steps to reducing anxiety are not about erasing it, but about understanding it, meeting it with awareness, and learning how to work with it instead of against it. When you start by understanding why anxiety matters, you begin to see its purpose. When you recognize the root, you uncover the patterns and stories that fuel it. When you shift perspective, you transform anxiety from punishment into preparation. When you take small, simple actions, you interrupt the cycle and create space for calm. And when you build momentum, you turn those small actions into lasting strength.
Anxiety may not disappear entirely, but it does not need to define you. With each step, you take back a measure of power, a measure of clarity, and a measure of peace. Reducing anxiety is a journey, not a destination. And the journey begins not with giant leaps, but with intentional steps that bring you closer to freedom, resilience, and a steadier way of living.